back. Now for the final part of the video. I had to do some editing and some of the stuff was accidentally cut out. So some of it had to get repackaged and refilmed. That's not the first time it happens. Sometimes as a content creator, I apologize because as soon as I get on the phone and I want to film, we get a bunch of idiot morons who like to call my house phone when they're not supposed to. And sometimes my best friend likes to call, and I don't like him calling. He calls 2 or 3 times in one day. And when I'm trying to wait for this person to stop calling, and when I go out for dinner and I come back, then I have to call him, ask him, was that you calling? And he act like he didn't call when he did. So we're trying to see who it is before I have to hang the phone up in their face, because it's like 6 o'clock. You ain't got no business calling after. So we're going to go ahead and, like I said, I had to hang up in their face because they don't know when to quit. It's like it's after day, stop calling. I apologize for that. So now, go right ahead and pick up where I left off. Coming in at number 5 is Rising Satsuki from Ninja Assassin. Now, this I've talked about in the last video, but I'm carrying it over to this video because I'm trying to, keep the time short because sometimes the camera can cut off. I think today's like really hot outside for no apparent reason. Whenever it gets too hot, the cell phone gets hot, and then it cuts on and off, and then you guys be trying to scratch your head and figure out, why am I, uploading videos, and you be like, man, where's the rest of it? So, I'm getting to that. I apologize for that. Now, Ninja Assassin is one of my favorite martial art movies because it displays 100% real martial arts. Like, some stuff is choreographed. They get stunt devils to come in and do dangerous stunts that the actors won't do. And this guy was willing to do all of it. He was just a pop star from where he came from. And when he played the character, spoiler alert if you ain't never seen Ninja Assassin, the movie's like at least 8 or 9 years old. To some people that's not that long ago. It came out in 2009. And it did spin off 3 films, but what hurt the franchise moving forward, it was the fact that the guy didn't come back to do the second and third film, so he got recast. But you learn a lot from the story of ninja mythology. Like, they took that idea, like, if you could reboot Mortal Kombat and call it Origin of Scorpion or Origin of Sub-Zero, that's probably what it would look like. So they took the idea that it's Mortal Kombat meets American Ninja. Like, it's Mortal Kombat in modern day. You get a girl teamed up with the main character, and they displayed elements of their abilities, and it kind of had somewhat of a supernatural feel to it because of the way that he could heal from injuries. There's the sword fighting, so it brought in some realism, and it kind of made you question what is your motivation for doing what you're doing, which some martial art movies back in the 80s and 90s used to do. They used to always have a philosophy and a principle, and this movie kind of had that. Where other movies missed it, it had it. Alright, coming in at number 4 is Jet Li in a movie called Cradle to the Grave. Now, Jet Li has been in almost 100 martial art films. He did at least 15, 20 movies for 10 years before he came to the United States and did smash hit movies like At War, Cradle to the Grave, Romeo Must Die, Black Mass 1 and 2. Before he appeared in the Expendables films, he did these other movies like Once Upon a Time, Part 1 and Part 2. And then, of course, he did his own movie called Fist of Legend, which was a remake of Bruce Lee's movie. To me, that should have been on this list. But Cradle to the Grave is on here because it got to answer a question that for almost 3 decades never got answered. What would have happened if you had someone that was a pure 100% complete legit martial artist and they took on somebody like mixed martial art fighting stars? You had Tito Ortiz in there, and that question got answered because people kept asking, what would have happened if Bruce Lee came in today's time period and took on some of these cage fighters in mixed martial arts? And you kind of got that with this movie, Cradle to the Grave. Jet Li was 100% pure, and these guys might have been bigger and stronger than him, and yet he still kicked their ass. So that movie always stands out as What would have happened if Bruce Lee came into today's time period? All right, coming in at number 3 is the White Power Ranger versus the Green Power Ranger. Now, this is at number 3 because it is by far the best fight in real life. Like, who could stop Tommy Oliver and the Power Rangers television series? First he was the Green Ranger, then he became the White Ranger, played by actor and television and film and real life martial artist and real life MMA fighter and martial arts teacher, Jason David Frank. He's one of my favorite heroes. He's one of my favorite martial artists of all times. I talked about him in other videos that relates to martial arts. And at the time in the 1990s, he was in his prime. He was the man. He had by far the huge critical reception on television because no one had never seen anything like him. And he was being greatly compared to Jean-Claude Van Damme, who came a decade before. Van Damme came in the 1980s. He comes around 93, 94, and just took over the game and kicked ass and take names. He took some of the kicks, and he said it was in inspiration of his character. And when we got to see the White Power Ranger, they came up with a concept that we didn't expect. Like, who could stop Tommy? Tommy himself, right? So there was the perfect challenge. He fought the Red Ranger twice. He fought Godar and became the second human in Power Ranger history to fight a human without his Green Ranger powers. And when he became the White Power Ranger, he would have Lord Zed make a clone of him. And they did what? The White Power Ranger versus the Green Power Ranger. And it was good. It was a 2-part episode, and it was very well done. And it went down in Power Ranger history as the best display of martial arts. And he showed right there that he was legit because he was doing high-risk kicks, backflips. He was doing some of his own stunts. In fact, there were a couple of episodes where he kind of, injured himself, but played through those injuries. And you could see this was being greatly compared to Jean-Claude Van Damme. I remember in the 1990s, people were doing this hype, like, who's better, Jean-Claude Van Damme or Jason David Frank? They're both my favorite heroes. I look up to both of them as martial artists. I met Jean-Claude Van Damme around 1991, 1992, and then that same time frame, we get around 97. Guess who I meet? Jason David Frank. So it's very rare to watch these people's movies, television shows, and then actually get to meet them in person. Most people who reveal their heroes and their idols, they never get that opportunity. I got that opportunity. When I met Jean-Claude Van Damme, it was like 14 years ago when he did a movie called Double Impact. It was Jean-Claude Van Damme doing what? Fighting himself, right? It was a story where he had a younger brother and an older brother, and they both looked like him, and they were fighting the villains in the movie called Double Impact. And then some 3 or 4.5 years later, I meet Jason David Frank. Even when I became a security guard at Top Shop, Top Man at the Grove, that's where all the rich, famous celebrities shop at, I saw my hero again. Because he did YouTube videos, and he always had a green bandana on his head, and he was doing YouTube videos, and he was talking about how he thought CM Punk was ducking and dodging him. And people was hyping up, for 3 years, people was hyping up this damn fight, Jason David Frank versus CM Punk. And for 3 years, it never happened. And in that same time frame, the controversial came right back up. Who's better, Jean-Claude Van Damme or Jason David Frank? And I always looked at them as they're both on the same level. It's the class and respect. And to me, I don't understand why two martial artists would fight each other over stupid, petty bullshit. They're a martial artist, I'm a martial artist. I met both of them, I spoke to both of them, and I don't appreciate martial artists bashing each other because of fame, fortune, or ego. You should learn how to put your ego and grudge to the side and look at each other face to face and shake hands. It's an old grudge. Jean-Claude Van Damme dominated the 1980s, and in the 90s, somewhere around 94, 95, he had some of these movies that bombed at the box office. And he started to no longer be the top guy. Guys like Stallone and Arnold and Van Damme had been holding the belt for so long, the championship belt for so long, that they needed some fresh blood, and Jason David Frank was that guy that you expected. So it's unfortunate that these two can't come to a compromise. And then, of course, you hear stories that they could have actually faced off, but that's what actually happened. And this Power Ranger fight, White Power Ranger versus Green Ranger, is probably one of the best fights in Power Rangers. You can't do a martial arts list without including Power Rangers. Coming in at number 2 is John Claude Van Damme versus Sylvester Stallone in Expendables Part 2. Now, to this very day, Part 2 is better than the first film, and it's better than Part 3, because in the second film, you've had Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Chuck Norris, Bruce Willis, Doug Lugland. You had Randy the Natural Cortell, Jason Statham, Jet Li, Terry Crews. But you had John Claude Van Damme. And that's what made the movie better. Like, for almost 25 years, people wanted that billion-dollar question answered. What would happen if John Claude Van Damme and Sylvester Stallone went face-to-face on the big screen? We got to see what would happen if it was Arnold versus Sylvester Stallone. It ended in a tie. We wonder what would happen if it was Stallone versus Douglas. We know Sylvester Stallone won that. But people was like, when we going to see Van Damme and John Claude Van Damme? And it was the best kick-ass movie cinematic fight, period. It was real. Van Damme was in his 50s in prime fit condition, and he showed that in his 50s he could still kick your ass. He had them high-risk kicks, and Sylvester Stallone, you got to give him respect and credit because he loves to do stuff that's actually real, not fake in his movies. He gets a lot of player haters because he's in his 70s, and people think that once you get in your 50s, your 60s, and your 70s, you should just retire and just let someone else take over. And with his alpha male mentality, he's showing you that even if you are in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, you can still kick ass and take names. You know, John Claude Van Damme proves you stay in athletic shape in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, life will be nice to you. Now, that don't mean you go pick a fight with people, but you stay in athletic shape in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, life will be nice back to you in return. And life was nice to Van Damme because if you've seen those commercials, the guy can still do the damn splits. So to me, this was the best fight, and it was real. When you watch the behind the scenes of Expendables Part 2, Van Damme was actually doing that shit for real. It ain't faking. He's literally giving Stallone some real kicks. And you're like, holy shit, they're letting them do this shit for real. Like, to everyone else, oh, no, it's scripted. No, with this fight, it was real because you're seeing Van Damme just come at him with everything. Yeah, Stallone might have won in the movie, but if you're talking about if these two would have thrown down in their primes, you know it's John Claude Van Damme all day, every day. No ifs and buts about it. Coming in at number 1 is Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris. Two legends, two icons, two martial artists, two guys who have their own philosophies, their own principles. Bruce Lee embodied the freestyle thinker of martial arts. He was freestyle, he was a free thinker. Chuck Norris was the logical, philosophical martial artist. He embodied what it means to be great and to be good on a level that most people never get to. And Bruce Lee was the guy that showed you that anything's possible, and when there ain't no way, you create a way. And their fight in the movie Return of the Dragon, or you call it Way of the Dragon, is by far one of the greatest martial art fights of all times. A lot of people don't realize they were actually fighting for real in that piece of the movie towards the end of the conclusion. You know, Chuck Norris can even back it up and say there were times where they would fight each other in practice and they fought in a hotel room, and Chuck Norris always said it, Bruce Lee's kicks would go so high that Bruce Lee could kick you no matter how tall you was. They fought in a hallway, and it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. So they were doing it for real. See, today, they won't let actors do shit like that because you can break your arm, your leg, the company get liable, suable, then they got to fire you, recast you in the movie. Back then, actors like that took risks. Now, when they fought in the Coliseum, that was the stuff of legend. They actually went to that location and they actually fought. And you can look some 25 years later, people copy that movie. I don't care if people say if they like the movie, they hate the movie. I don't care if people say that fight is weak, it ain't that good of a fight. They copy it. You look at Gladiator. What are you seeing in Gladiator? towards the end of that finale. You're seeing pretty much that fight, right? You look at the third Matrix film. What is that? And all those other movies copy that one movie. So some people think this is the greatest fight in history, and some people think it's not the greatest fight in history. Some people might think the fight at number 2, Jean-Claude Van Damme versus Sylvester Stallone, should be highly regarded at number 1. But the reason why this is number 1 is because if it weren't for Bruce Lee, people would have never watched his martial art movies or try to do martial arts. If it weren't for Chuck Norris, you probably wouldn't even have an interest in filmmaking as well as martial arts. Both guys came in at a period where they needed to give martial arts some new life. And these are legends, these are icons. They both have stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. You look at the way Bruce Lee embodied being a free thinker, he showed you it's okay to be different and think different. Chuck Norris showed you it's okay to be a logical thinker and take risk every once in a while. I mean, you see how today the guy's like in his 80s, the guy can still kick your ass. I mean, you look at those Bowflex commercials, he's still in shape. People player hate on Chuck Norris because deep down inside they wish they can live through him characteristically, to be his age and be in athletic shape. See, a lot of people think that when you get in your 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, you're supposed to just be fat and out of shape and just give up because they are like that. And these guys are alpha males. These guys don't listen to what other people think. Real alpha males don't care what people think, period. And these is a prime example. So that's why I made this video. I had to remake the video over. So until then, peace.